got some more people that signed up, so I'm thinking that as the program progresses, people will wander in. But good evening. I'm Jen Busak, who along with Judy Weinstein and Kim Byers makes up the leadership team of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metropolitan area. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We influence public policy through education and advocacy, and we focus significant effort on registering new voters and encouraging them to get out to vote. If you're not registered to vote, or if you've moved since the last election, please stop by our table. It's out in the entryway, and you'll see all kinds of information that the League provides, and we do that free of charge. We sell nothing. And we try to get people to actually use the vote they signed up for. By the way, the League of Women Voters is not limited to women. Men are most welcome to join us in making democracy work for all. Tonight, I'd like to welcome you to our forum, Census 2020, Stand Up and Be Counted. Our distinguished presenters are Jeff Behler from the U.S. Census Bureau, Liz Baranowski from Governor Cuomo's office, Pete Nabozny, the Children's Agenda, and Melody Lopez from the Civic Engagement Table. Our special thanks to League member Ann Carmody, who is moderating tonight's forum and organized all of this for us. We're proud to sponsor this community conversation. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer segment. There's papers and pens on all of the tables. Please take notes and write down your questions. We request, of course, that all of our guests respect our panel, our hosts here at Asbury First United Methodist Church, and our own commitment to civil and respectful discourse. I would like now to introduce Sandra, Director of Special Projects and Education Initiatives for the City of Rochester, for some opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here, and it's good that this is a special evening that we have to spend. And I thank you, such a distinguishing panelist that is here to answer the questions. And we want to thank you on behalf of Mayor Lovely A. Warren that she's been invited. Unfortunately, there's so many engagements that she can attend, and so she thought I could do a good job, so I'm here for you. She's smiling at me, so I can tell her that she smiled at me. I must say, I think it's very appropriate that you're hosting this forum in this church, and thank you for the introduction. Since Jesus was born during a census. You might think that's, yeah, really. You might think that's a plug for Jesus, but it may be. But it really is a big plug for the census. It's been around for a very long time, which I think we all can admit. The census has survived the test of time because it's important. So on behalf of Mayor Lovely A. Warren, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum. And I want to thank all of you for being here tonight and learning about this process that will guide the 2020 census so we can play a role in making sure all of Rochester's citizens are indeed counted. From the point of view of the City of Rochester, an accurate census count is crucial. The federal government awards billions of dollars each year to state and local governments, and those dollar amounts are based on census data. And these grants help us accomplish what Mayor Warren's goal of creating more jobs, safer and more vibrant neighborhoods, and better educational opportunities. And these grants, educational grants, will include to ensure that all of the children have access to a quality education regardless of where they live. And that's Head Start grants, grants for women, infants and children, nutritional programs, public transportation, road rehabilitation and construction, emergency food and shelter grants, and the list can go on and on. So to make a long history short, if our population is undercounted, the city of Rochester will lose valuable resources to help our residents thrive and reach their full potential. So once again, thank you, League of Women Voters, for holding this forum and taking an early lead on the process to make sure all of our residents are counted in the census. And thank you, distinguished panel, for being here to make sure that that happens also. And God bless you all.
And now, Ann Carter. Thank you, June, our moderator.
Yes, good evening, and thank you so much for being here. We're really grateful to have such a good audience so you can become more aware of the census as it unfolds, as the process unfolds, help learn why the census is so incredibly important for all of our community. So thank you. Tonight you're going to hear the unique expertise of our panelists representing the Census Bureau, the Governor's Office, locally the Children's Agenda, and the Civic Engagement Table. Following this, I'm going to ask respectfully for you to hold your questions to the end, just because we want to make sure all of our speakers are given the opportunity to share their message with us. Then we'll ask you to take about 10 or 15 minutes to brainstorm some ideas of what just comes to mind as a next step, because we know 2020 is a ways away, but it's not that far away. So those can be ideas, they can even be additional questions that you might have. What we will do is make sure we compile them and then redistribute them to all of you. So again, thank you so much for your patience. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Behler, who's going to share the perspective of the Census Bureau.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Behler. I'm the Regional Director for the New York region. It's one of 6 regions we have with the Census Bureau, responsible for all data collection activities related to our ongoing surveys as well as the 2020 census. The New York region, we cover all of the state of New York, New Jersey, all the New England states, as well as Puerto Rico. So what do we do? And I always like to mention this because people think the Census Bureau only comes around in the years ending in 0, and that's not the case. We are out there every day knocking on doors, collecting very important information. You hear about the unemployment rate that comes out the first Friday of every month. We collect that data for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who then releases the unemployment rate. Housing starts, consumer price index, health indices, crime statistics, the American Community Survey. We have a staff, probably 500 to 600 staff in the state of New York that are out there every day knocking on doors. So please don't think if someone knocks on your door that it's a scam. There definitely will be scams in the year 2020, I can promise you that. We like to work directly with our partners. So when we learn about something, we let you know. If you hear something that sounds funny, if you hear a complaint from any of your community members, reach out to us. We'll do employment verifications. We'll do the legwork to tell you if the survey you have in the mail is legitimate or not. And I'll just mention a couple key things. We will never ask for Social Security numbers. We will never ask for bank account information. We will never ask for money. If you hear those 3 things, it's definitely not the Census Bureau. Okay? Next slide, please. All right, so on this slide, there's this great infographic that unfortunately doesn't, on this program, it won't appear, but I'll make sure all of you receive this. I think you can send out my presentation. But basically, it's 4 steps to what a census is. There's 4 things that we do for a census, and that's it. Okay? The first step is establishing where to count people. So think of it as just creating this giant address database. So we started with our 2010 address database, and throughout the decade, we're getting updates from the Postal Service. They're telling us where they're delivering mail to what addresses. We have our current surveys that are out there updating the address list. We have an operation in which the only opportunity that we actually share our Title 13 data once every decade with local jurisdictions, with the state governments and local and county governments. Our LUCA operation, our local update of census addresses, will actually share our address list with For instance, the state of New York, they have 120 days to provide feedback to us to make sure we have the most robust, the most accurate census as we move forward to 2020. What do addresses have to do with all this? If we have every address of where someone lives or could live, we can make sure that they get the opportunity to receive our mailings when they go out, and then we'll be sure to be knocking on their door if we don't have a response from them. So that's the first step, just creating this address database. The second step, probably the most important step that I want to spend a few minutes on, is motivating people to respond. And that's part of our partnership program. We're going to have a national media campaign, we're going to have a national partnership program, but one of the most important things we do is our local partnership program, working with every one of you in this room. You are trusted voices in your community. We know we'd be more than happy to go out there and stand on every street corner talking about why the census is important. Over $675 billion of federal funding is disseminated every year based upon census data and census formulas. We can talk about the power of congressional reapportionment, but we know it means so much more coming from you to all your community members. So that's what the partnership program we work with. I do want to introduce Daniel Harp in the back. Daniel, if you raise your hand or stand up. He is one of our partnership specialists that's currently tasked with, he's got a small geography, what we call upstate New York. We're just in the beginning of our partnership program, so we're going to hire, within our region, probably about 250 partnership specialists. I plan to have about 75 or so in the state of New York. Outside of New York City, their sole job is to work with our partners to educate the public on the importance of the census and to provide support. So two things I will always ask any partnership meeting I go to. We need help with recruiting and we need help with educating the public. And that's what I'm talking about now, educating the public. The third step, once we motivate the people to respond, is to count the population. And there's 4 ways in 2020 that you'll be able to be counted. So we're excited about our first way, is online response. This will be the first time you can actually fill out your census form online. We're really excited about that. It reduces the amount of cost to the taxpayer. It also increases the quality. Okay? Now at the same time, we understand that for some people that's scary. They don't want to enter their information online. So we work with our partners. We know some people, even though this is going to be formatted, you can enter your census on your smartphone. We know some people may not want to do that. So we look for partners such as libraries, community colleges that may have computer banks that we can use to have census events where the community members come into a trusted place. There's a trusted local voice there who telling them about the importance of the census, helping them fill out their census form. So that's exciting we have that ability this time around. So that's the first way. The second way is on all the mailings that we do, everyone's not going to get a census form the first mailing. They're going to get a postcard. And on that postcard, it's going to give them a URL, and it'll say, please go on your computer to this link. This is your census ID, which is basically like an address, but it's a unique identifier that tells us the data you are about to enter belongs at this particular household. And so that's the first mailing. We're not going to mail a questionnaire probably until mailing 4. All right? So we're really pushing people to try and do this online. But of course, we do understand in some areas, whether it's internet connectivity or just people don't want to fill it out online, there's other options. So on all of those mailings that we do, there's a toll-free number. And the second way people can actually submit their data this time around, they can also call the toll-free number. We always had a toll-free number as a help and support line, but this is the first time we'll actually accept your data, the exact same data that's on the form, the exact same data that's online. We'll accept that over the phone. What's also exciting about that is we'll have 12 languages covered by the staff who are picking up those phones. That's something increased. In addition, those 12 languages, we will also have the questionnaire in those languages online. Okay? Those 12 languages comprise 97% of the responses we receive during the census. So you ask, what about that other 3%? Well, those languages are important too. So we'll have language guides in 59 other languages. All right, so it's not the questionnaire, but it's a guide in their native language telling them how to fill out that questionnaire. So we're excited about that. So that's the second way, over the phone. The third way is we're going to do a targeted mailing. So we're going to start our first mailing probably mid-March of 2020, which will be a postcard, and then we'll send a letter maybe a week or two later saying, hey, we sent you that postcard. Don't forget, please go online. Here's your census ID. We'll send her a third mailing, which will be a reminder postcard. And then the fourth mailing that we do, what we call a targeted mailing, is we'll send out a paper questionnaire to any household, any address in which we haven't received a response as of that point in time, which is probably mid-April, maybe a little bit earlier than mid-April. Okay, so that'll be the third way for those people who just want to get that form in the mail like they've done all the past 5 or 6 decades. They'll be able to do that as well. The fourth and final way we count people, and probably without a doubt the most expensive way, is what we call our non-response follow-up operation. And that will start in May, and we'll hire what we're anticipating around 350,000 people nationwide to go knock on doors to ask those same 10 questions that are on the online application, that are on the paper form, that can be collected over the phone. So we're trying to reduce that amount, because if we reduce the amount of doors we need to knock on, then we reduce the overall cost to the taxpayer. All right, so those are the 4 ways in which we'll be collecting the data this time around. And that's the third step, is counting the population. And then by law, or the Constitution, by December 31st, 2020, we have the 4th step, which is turning over the counts to the President of the United States. All right, and in a nutshell, that's what a census is. So I talked a little bit about motivating people to respond in our partnership program. One of the biggest components of our partnership program is what we call a complete count committee. And a complete count committee is just a list of, or a group of, trusted voices in the community who understand what the concerns are for their particular geography. So it could be the city of Rochester as a complete count committee. I know that the New York State is going to have a complete count committee. But it's a group of individuals who understand the challenges, who can then work with census staff to determine what are the best way to use the resources available. So we'll have a social media kit. We'll have a whole bunch of drop-in articles and messaging. But that messaging may not make sense in the state it's in. We need your input on what's the right message for your community. Let's say there's a neighborhood, there's a building of immigrants that are new to the area, relatively new, and they don't trust the government. Well, what's the right message? So we want to work with that complete count committee to understand the challenge, to understand what's the right message, and then find who is the trusted voice. Dan and I had a great meeting this afternoon with a reverend over in Buffalo, and he was talking about this great idea of having a Census Sunday, for his congregation. He's going to have a Census Sunday, and we're going to invite maybe a local partner who has laptops, and they're going to come to church, and then he's going to talk, about Mary and Joseph. They were on their way to Bethlehem to be counted, and talk about the importance of the census and what it means for that community, the funding that's coming in for that community to support Head Start, to Medicare, to roads and infrastructure, schools. And then, rather than say, okay, go home and wait for that form to come in your mail or for that postcard, sit down right now and fill out the census form. That's what this automation allows us to do, this technology. It just opens the doors to so many new opportunities. So you'll hear a lot in the future about complete count committees. We really are trying to push those because, again, we're getting the right people in the room to have that discussion to make sure we get everyone counted. That's everyone's goal here, is just to make sure we get the most complete and accurate count. So that's the second piece. The first piece, recruiting, which is something we're starting right now. We've actually started on September 7th. This web link at the bottom, 2020 census.gov/jobs. So in 2010, we would have to work with our partners to get a room like this and set it up with tables and invite people, post flyers, hey, the Census Bureau is hiring, come to a Census Bureau hiring event. You would come in here, we'd hand out a stack of papers, you'd fill out an application, you'd take a short assessment, give us all that paperwork back, we'd run it back to the office and key it all into a system so that we can hire you at some point in time. So again, we're relying heavily on the use of technology this time around. This time, all you need to do is go to this website, click a link, create an account, and you can go ahead and apply for jobs. 99% of our jobs, we're going to be hiring via this web link here. So it's active now. It'll stay active through the life cycle of the census. So you can apply right now. Maybe you don't want to work right now. Maybe you want to wait till the summer of 2020 when jobs come around. That's okay. You can go ahead and apply now. And then, you know, if you're offered a job, you say you're not interested right now, we'll keep your name in the pool and we'll call you again the next time around. So these are the types of positions and the timeline of when we're hiring. So we're selecting our recruiting managers. We kicked off September 7th. We're selecting recruiting assistants. You're not going to hear a lot about this in the media right now. We're not spending any money on advertising. It's more word of mouth, only because our first big hiring event won't be until the spring of 2019. All right, so in January, we're really going to start pushing this website. But still, if someone's interested, you know, they're not looking for a job immediately, they can go ahead and start, you know, they can apply tonight if they want to. And then our first big operation, address canvassing, will start. We train our what we call listers for address canvassing. These are people who basically, they're going to have a laptop, they're going to be given a block. It could be a city block, it could be a rural 1 mile square block. They're basically asked to canvass the area and compare to what they see on the ground to what we have on our address list. It's very different than the next big operation, which is in the spring of 2020. That's when we knock on doors and actually talk to people, collecting the data that we haven't received. Okay. So contact information. I wasn't able to update the slide. I'll update it and send it to you to include Dan's contact information so you have his email. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to either Dan or myself. You have our New York RCC partnership line. It's a generic line that goes into our partnership department. So if you're interested in having a partnership specialist come out to an event, if you just have questions, if you have concerns, or you've heard from people who are applying and are frustrated, please let us know. We want to help them out as quickly as we can. Well, thank you for your time. I look forward to our conversation, and I'll turn it over back to Liz.
I work in the governor's office, and I lead the multi-agency state working group on census. I'm from Buffalo. I used to live in Rochester, so I'm always excited to come back here, and I know some of you, so it's good to see you again. I got involved in the census about 1.5 years ago. I had never even filled out my own census form before, I'm embarrassed to say. But I got a phone call and someone said, oh, we have this form from the Census Bureau that needs to be filled out. Can you fill it out and then just do whatever needs to be done with it? And here I am 1.5 years later and not even halfway through what needs to be done with it. The good news is it's really interesting stuff, and I feel like there's a good role for all of us to make it a successful count. The governor is deeply committed to a full and accurate count, and he's told us whatever needs to be done, let's do it, let's get it done, because we need to count every New Yorker. We need to count everyone in the right place only once, which is what the Census Bureau always says, but we're happy to use that as our motto too. Jeff talked a little bit about the importance of the census, all the decisions that are made using census data, and I just want to reiterate a few of those things. One is federal funding. There's a multitude of federal funding decisions that are made, at least in part, based on census data. New York State gets $53 billion annually based on census data, so if it's not right, we could be losing out on a lot of money. I think it's CUNY, someone at CUNY has estimated that it's about $2,600 per person that isn't counted every year that we miss out on. So imagine what your community could do with just $2,600, and then think about all the people who aren't being counted in your community and how much more money and resources that could bring to your community. Additionally, congressional reapportionment, I think everybody's aware of that, how important that is, as well as local, state and local redistricting. And the Electoral College, you may be particularly interested in the Electoral College these days. If you are, let's work on making sure the census is accurate and complete. The other thing that we see a lot is so many data users. It's important that we get the data right. It's used by nonprofits, governments, private industry. I mean, probably everybody in here, if you've ever worked for a company or an organization or you volunteered, your organization has used census data, and we only get an opportunity every 10 years to make it right. So we have to live with it if it's not right, and that's just an incredible wave of effects that we get from having inaccurate data. So our goal is to make sure that that data is as accurate as possible. We have a few challenges this time around. I'm going to say some things that aren't great about the federal government. I want you to please not take that as an indication of my feelings about Jeff and his staff, because they're tremendous. We've been working very closely with Census Bureau staff over the last year and a half, and I have to say it's the best intergovernmental partnership I have ever experienced in my career. They've been absolutely wonderful, and we are really able to collaborate and innovate together. So, thanks, Jeff. However, there are some challenges. Number one is the Trump administration. I think most people know sort of the political climate that we're living in right now and how that leads to a lot of fear for vulnerable populations. And a lot of that is coming straight from the top. The governor's been an outspoken opponent of President Trump's, and he continues to be committed to positions that support women, support immigrants, support anyone who may be a person of color, anyone who's vulnerable. The governor is committed to supporting these folks, and if that means having to oppose the administration, he's more than happy to do that. The federal budget is a problem for us. You may know that over the last year and a half, there's been a lot of trouble getting funding for the Census Bureau and for the census particularly. The latest budget includes a fair amount of money, but we're a little worried that it might be forward funding the effort, and that as we get into later 2019 and into 2020, there won't be enough money allocated for this. So we're going to keep a close eye on that. We're worried about leadership, an absence of leadership at the Census Bureau because they don't have a director right now. That's a problem for us. We are worried about technology. As Jeff said, the primary method of response we're hoping for this time around is online. We're worried about whether or not the system will work properly because it's a new system. We're worried about cybersecurity because that should be a concern in all of these kinds of applications. We're worried about access to technology. There's a lot of people who don't have internet access, and we need to make sure that we do everything we can to help those people fill out their form and make sure they get counted. We are very worried about the citizenship question on the questionnaire. You may know that the Commerce Secretary added a question on citizenship to the questionnaire, and we haven't had that kind of question in decades. It is on the American Community Survey, but it's not on the regular census. We believe that this question will significantly depress turnout and response rate among immigrants, non-English speakers, anybody who's worried about their immigration status at all. We think that that's by design. So there's a couple lawsuits that are going on trying to prevent this question from ultimately being on the final questionnaire. New York State is leading a coalition of 19 states in one of these lawsuits, and the judge ruled against the federal government on a motion to dismiss. So the suit is proceeding and they're in discovery right now. I believe the next hearing is the second week of October, so we'll see what comes from that. But the governor and the attorney general are very committed to following this through and making sure that that question is not on the questionnaire. We've had a little turmoil in the AG's office, but the current AG and the endorsed candidate for, at least the Democrat for attorney general, are committed to following this through. So who are we worried about? We're worried about vulnerable people and hard to count people. That includes anybody who doesn't speak English or doesn't speak English well or doesn't read English. Jeff mentioned the 12 languages and then the 59 languages where there's a guide. In one high school in Buffalo, there are 74 languages spoken. I'm sure there are dozens of languages spoken in Monroe County. So we're worried about how do we help people who don't understand the material they've gotten and may not respond at all? How do we reach these people, tell them that it's a good idea to fill out the census, and then help them actually do it in a language that isn't their own? We're worried about people who live in poverty. We're worried about children under 5. We're worried about elderly people, anybody who doesn't have access to the internet, and we're worried about anybody who has a status question. So whether that's an immigration status question or it's a housing status question. There are a lot of people who are living in not strictly legal conversions. They may be living in a garage or a basement, and the property owner is worried about the city coming in and penalizing them because they're not up to code. We don't care about that. Jeff doesn't care about that. For purposes of the census, it doesn't matter what kind of dwelling you live in. If you don't live in a dwelling, if you're a homeless person, we still want to count everybody. So we need to get our message out that we're not sharing that information. If we find that you are in an illegal apartment, we're not sharing that information. We're not collecting that information. And it's really just the importance of getting counted that we're focusing on. So what are we doing to address these problems? Jeff mentioned the LUCA efforts, the local update of census addresses. For the very first time, every single county and the city of New York participated in LUCA, which is enormous. That's 57 counties plus the 5 counties of New York City. Every single one participated in LUCA, so every piece of the state was covered by a government that was looking at that address list and updating it to make sure it was as accurate as possible. In addition, the state engaged in its own process of looking through data. So we used real property tax data, we used publicly available information from the DMV, and we used utility hookup data that was shared with us by utility companies, and ran all 3 of those databases against the database that the Census Bureau gave us. And we found a bunch that needed to be updated. So we had almost 400,000 addresses that needed to be added or changed to make it more accurate. That's a huge amount of addresses, and we hope that we're going to see a good return on that, of people that will be enumerated. But we still have to count them. We've only got part of it done, we still have to count them. The counties, the 57 counties together, submitted about 200,000 addresses to the Census Bureau to update their records. And the city of New York submitted over 120,000 addresses. So there's a lot of people that we need to find and count. Through that process, Cornell's program on applied demographics was enormously helpful to us. They designed an online tool for local governments to use to be able to compare their real property tax records to the Census Bureau's list, and they provided a lot of technical support for us. But it was revolutionary in that you could open up one browser screen, see the Census Bureau's list, see your list, see where they don't match up, see a Google map so you can just look at it and say, oh yeah, there's a building there. And if you're the town clerk in Penfield, you probably know what that building is because you're familiar with your town in a way that I'm certainly not and the Census Bureau isn't. And then you were able to take all that information and create the update for the Census Bureau. So that's how we ended up with so many updates and changes to the list. The state also provided a fellow. We have these Empire Fellows who are recent graduates of either law school or grad school, and we assigned a fellow to every county in the state to give them technical advice and support as they went through the process. It's the first time we've ever had such an engagement on the part of the state and on the part of local governments. Monroe County did participate through the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council, and if you know Dave Zorn and his guys over there, they did an amazing job. So they are going to be engaged as we go forward in enumeration also. But if you see them, give them a pat on the back because they did a huge amount of work. What are we doing going forward? You may have heard that in the state budget this year there was the creation of a complete count commission for the state. The commission is composed of 16 members. One of those members is your own county clerk, who's been appointed by the Assembly to serve on this commission, which is terrific for the Finger Lakes region in general. The commission isn't fully staffed up yet, but we expect it to be up and running soon. Its task is to review factors that have historically led to undercounts, to examine the factors which are new this year, which we think will be problematic, make a recommendation for a work plan to address those factors, and then make a recommendation to the governor and the legislature for funding and resources in advance of the next budget cycle. So the report is due January 10th to the governor and the legislature, and I'm confident that there's going to be a lot of information there about hard-to-count populations and the kind of targeted outreach that we need to do to these populations and how we support local governments, local nonprofits, service providers in doing that work. So how can you help? A couple things. As Jeff mentioned, we're relying on trusted voices to get our message out in the community. So I need you to talk to your sister, your neighbor, your kid, you know, the person who sits in church next to you, your dog walker, everybody, the cashier at Wegmans. I need you to say, hey, did you fill out your census form? Did you know the census is coming? You need to fill out your census form. Because you know your community, you know the people around you, and you know what they're concerned about. So if somebody says, you know, I'm worried that they're going to take my social security number and it's not going to be secure, and you say, no, I went to this seminar and they told me they're not going to be collecting that. So you can reassure the people in your community. We are encouraging every county to also establish a complete count committee. So we've encouraged Monroe County to do so, and we hope that they'll do that. And we hope that you'll engage with that complete count committee. So if you have particular concerns about some aspect of your community, whether it's geographic or ethnic or language-based, or we've heard that sportsmen who own guns are be counted this time around. Are you a member of a sportsman club and you think that it's important to get counted? Well, there might be a complete count committee around an issue like that. So we're asking you to please engage in those and offer your feedback to the organizers of the complete count committee. At the same time, give us your feedback. I am happy to go talk to literally anybody that wants me to go talk. So if you have a group that would like to have an information session on the census, please give me a call, let me know. I will come to it. The Census Bureau has been excellent about coming to these kind of events. We'll get you the information, we'll help you get the message out. Additionally, if you or a group that you're part of wants to offer written testimony, so to speak, even though it's not officially testimony yet. If you want to send me something in writing that says, I think this is a priority, or I think this is a problem here, I think you need to allocate resources there, please do. We would love to hear that, and we're going to be compiling all of the information that we receive at sessions like this, information that we receive in writing. We'll be compiling all of that for the Complete Count Commission in order to, you know, just tell them what we've been seeing around the state and what's important to communities around the state. I'll have my business cards here afterwards, so please come say hi, and I'm sure the league ladies will have my contact information. We'll be happy to share it with you too. Additionally, please contact your legislators. I told you that the commission's got to make a recommendation for funding. It still will have to go through the state budget process. So think about all the people who have input in that, and you may wish to reach out to your legislators and say, hey, this is important to me, and I think that the state should fund these efforts. Hopefully you won't say that you don't think it's important. The big message here is please don't wait. There's so much work to be done by everybody that we're not going to control it all, the Census Bureau is not going to control it all. We're encouraging everyone, if you see a need in your community, if you have an idea for your community, please get started. Please get the message out as soon as possible. We're happy to support you, we're happy to help you, we're happy to coordinate with you, but please don't wait for us. Please jump in with both feet as soon as you can. There's tons of work, there's more than enough for every one of us to do. So if you can do your part, we'll all benefit. We need to count every single New Yorker. So yeah, that's all I have to tell you today. I'd be happy to answer questions when we get to the end. But again, just come see me and just let me know, okay?
Before the next speaker, there is a New York plated car. He thinks it's Cadillac, but not sure. Something similar. The plate is GKG 5916. Lights are flashing. Since anybody's
Hello everyone, my name is Pete Nabozny. I'm the Director of Policy with the Children's Agenda here in Rochester. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of our perspective on the 2020 census. I also apologize, I'm kind of getting over a cold. I have a 17-month-old who's wonderful, but also a bit of a disease carrier. So I've just given me more colds in the last year and a half, and I think I've had 10 years. So I may cough occasionally during it. But on the mend, and all that. So just to make sure people are familiar with the Children's Agenda, we are a children's policy and advocacy organization based here in Rochester. We work on a range of different issues. Our mission is up there. We're really focused on advocacy, on driving kind of what works for children in this community and elsewhere, and really thinking about these issues with children in a holistic, whole child perspective. So there's a lot of organizations that focus on child care, which we do, which is really important. There's organizations that focus on things like home visitation programs or working to improve K-12 education. And we do all those things. We really try to think about other ways that we can better support children in our community. And one of those important ways is supporting efforts to make sure people are getting counted as part of the 2020 census. All right. So I'm going to try not to repeat things that other people have said. So there's some slides that are going to kind of cover things that others have talked about. But just to take a step back for a second, why is the census so important? First of all, it tells us a lot about what's happening in our communities, where population is rising and falling, who's moving around, what changes we see over the past 10 years. The data that Jeff's team collects regularly, I'm a big user of. I follow the releases of census data regularly. And if you think about a lot of the conversations we have in this community around things like the incredibly concentrated, intense poverty that we have, that we're struggling with as a community, that's data that we learned from Jeff. We wouldn't know that if it wasn't for the Census Bureau. We'd experience it, we'd still be having the same challenges, but we wouldn't have a real sense of sort of what's happening in the community in the same way. So it's really important that all the census activities are really important for just kind of helping us understand, to making what's going on in our community. But the decennial census, the every 10-year census, is incredibly important in lots of other ways. As we know, it determines representation at all levels. American democracy is sort of based on this idea of the every 10-year census. It's written into the Constitution. It informs so much of how we're organizing ourselves and how political representation works and who has power and influence over what's happening in our country. As others have mentioned, it informs so much federal funding, so much I'll touch on in a bit, but it's incredibly important for us as a community to get our fair share of dollars based on our need, and we need to make sure that we're being counted. And then finally, while Jeff's team is collecting data regularly and producing yearly, in some cases much more frequent data, the 10-year census, there's no do-overs. If we don't count people, we have to wait another 10 years. And that's a long time. That's a lot of federal funding that's locked in. That's a political representation for 10 years. 10 years is a long time. And we need to make sure we're getting it right and that things are working for our community. So that's our congressional map in New York State. That's informed by this. The elections that are going on in a couple months, the size of the districts really depends on how well counted things are throughout the state, as well as the number of districts, as we know. So federal, it's very important federal, and if we go to the next one. It was a map of Monroe County legislature, so that's not quite as pretty as the other map, I think. But even representation locally, how we think about the elections that we have to elect our Monroe County legislature, the size of the districts, all of that is influenced by this census, and that's incredibly important for a lot of the local decisions we have to make in our community as well. But as we go, we do know that not everyone's being counted, and there's lots of ways. The census is incredibly important. They do an incredibly, just an amazing job getting to people and making sure that folks are being recorded as living where they are. But we also know that there are certain portions of our communities that are being less well counted than others. And we have lots of ways to tell that, but we know what happens. So if we could go to the next one. This is a map of the hard to count census tracts in our community here. And hard to count, for this definition, it's orange and intensely red if it's below the mail-in rate in 2010 was below 73%. So these census tracts that we see, which as we see are primarily concentrated in the city of Rochester, those are places where it's much harder to get the mail-in response. The redder it gets, the lower the initial rate of responses. A lot of those folks were counted in the end through whether it's the door-to-door activities or whatnot, but that's incredibly important for us in understanding kind of what we need to do in the next couple of years to get ready for this next census. And of particular importance to the children's agenda, young children under 5 are the most undercounted, I'll say, group that we have. 2.2 million children under 5 were missed in the 2010 census, according to estimates. 6.5% of Black and Hispanic children were missed. That's the highest missed rate. And this is getting worse. It's the rate of missed young children has tripled since 1980. And in New York State, 43% of children under 5 live in a hard-to-count census tract. And that's the 3rd highest rate in the country, behind Alaska and New Mexico. So we have a particular challenge in this state. We've done a good job at it historically, at getting people counted. We do better than some other states in some ways, but we have a particular challenge in New York State with children under 5. So why is that? There's lots of reasons. One thing that we spend a lot of time focusing on with the children's agenda, children under 5 are of any age group, the age group most likely to be in poverty in the United States and in our community here. And folks who are in poverty are moving around a lot more. They're less connected to lots of resources. They're struggling just to kind of get through the day and make ends meet. And so there's a correlation between poverty rates and reporting to the census that we need to address. Young children are often more complicated living arrangements. There's family members can be staying with other family members. Young children are more likely to be in foster care than other age groups of children. There could be confusion over who's supposed to record the children where, and parents with young children are more likely to be renters. And so there's a lot of kind of uncertainty within this group. There's also, as we were talking about, language barriers. Families with young children are much less likely to have English as their primary language. It's great to hear that there's strategies to address that, but we need to kind of keep on ramping those things up. And also, families with young children could be disproportionately harmed by this citizenship question that we'll talk a little bit about, and we already did. And so that's a particular concern to us as well. So if we go to the next one. So what does that mean? If we take a big step back, that means there's less political representation for communities with young children. There's less power in terms of voting and representation and things like that. And then if you look at a lot of these programs, a lot of the federal funding goes towards supporting children. If you think about things like the CHIP program, which is for health insurance, or special education grants that go to the states, Head Start, obviously it's for young children. These programs depend on the census count, and we know that when we're missing kids, we're not getting the resources to the communities that need them. So, as we've talked about, we've got some concerns around the 2020 census. The Census Bureau does a remarkable job with the resources that they have, but they've been underfunded for some time now. And that can damage things like having a real accurate count of our annual poverty rate. If we had kind of more surveys out there and understanding what's happening, we'd have less margin of error on these things, we'd have a better sense of what's happening in our community. But as we ramp up towards a decennial census, when we don't have funding to get things done like field tests and all this new technology that we're doing, and really working out the kinks, as I said, we've only got one chance. So if we run into challenges as the census rolls out, there are no do-overs. So communities that are particularly hard to count are less likely to be counted at that point. I think it's great. I use the internet all the time. I'm looking forward to completing the census online. But we do know that internet access, things like that, is connected to socioeconomic status. It's connected to there are lower rates of internet access in low-income and minority communities, which also, as we saw on the map, are communities that were already kind of the hardest to count. And so I think it's a great option, and we're supporting the online count, but we need to really grapple with the consequences. Hopefully we have a real good plan for this. And the citizenship question, if our goal is to get everyone counted, we can't introduce questions that we don't need on the census that will depress response rates. The Constitution says everybody needs to be counted, and so we need to design a census that counts everybody and doesn't put fear in people to avoid responding to the census, and again, particularly harming already marginalized communities. So what can be done? Right away, we've got to ramp up funding for the census. New York State is also playing a huge role here in getting funding together. But the time to fully fund the Census Bureau was yesterday, but we've really got to make sure that in this next budget year, things happen. We also, particularly with young children, I think there were a lot of lessons learned in 2010 as to why young children were undercounted. And so making sure as we go into this next census that we have a particular plan to address that age group, which is most likely to be undercounted. And as this partnership program rolls out, making sure that child serving organizations are key players in that, making sure that Head Start providers, the community action agencies like ABC and others are really at the table there to get people counted as part of the census. We also, unfortunately, this has become politicized, and people already have lots of privacy and confidentiality concerns about the census, and we need to take a step back from that. We need to address people's concerns about data protection and things like that, assuring them as we're trying to do that the census isn't collecting social security numbers, it's not reporting you for having a converted apartment or anything like that. It's really just trying to count people, but that all has to be kind of understood in the context of what is happening in this country. So I'm hoping that as the census comes near, we can kind of take a step away from the politicization of this process and really prioritize whatever it does, whatever works to ensure that folks are counted. So yeah, that's that, and that's our perspective on it. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. How's it going? I know you've all been sitting here hearing a lot of information, so I'm going to be as efficient as possible so we can get to the discussion. So my name is Melody Lopez. I'm the director of the New York State Civic Engagement Table. And this State Civic Engagement Table is a coalition organization. We work with about 60 nonprofits in regions across the state, working on voter mobilization, voting rights, representation, and primarily focused on working with communities of color, low-income communities, and young people. And we're, of course, particularly concerned about the census for all of the reasons that have been discussed by all of the esteemed speakers here today. And so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about that stuff. I'm really going to take a moment to talk a little bit more about, and hopefully spark some ideas around how we can actually make sure our communities are counted. Like, what do we do with all this information? What do we do next? And I know some good ideas have already been brought up by some of the other speakers. But just to kind of summarize, the census, we're still in 2018, but it's in the census of the 2020. So theoretically, it feels like there's some time, but there's not a lot. And so I really am really pleased that you all are here tonight to have this conversation, because these are exactly the kinds of conversations we need to be having now. Because, as other folks have said, every community is different, and the messages that work here in Rochester may not work in other communities, but there are lessons that we can share with each other, and kind of unique needs and culture and all of those sorts of factors that folks need to talk about with each other to try to develop a plan. That's where we are today. We need to actually make a plan that's going to be resonating with your community. So what can we do to get ready? So one of the things that we're doing at the State Civic Engagement Table is building a collaboration kind of across sectors, right? So we sort of talked about the need to bring together all different kinds of organizations. Paul mentioned the folks, bringing folks from the children's serving communities, but also over in the church, so clergy, local government, all sorts of business community, folks that maybe we don't necessarily always work with. This is something that actually impacts everybody. So even if, you may be like, oh, maybe they're not necessarily a group that I necessarily work with in my regular work, the census is an opportunity to kind of bring together folks who you may not always have, may always have an opportunity to work with, because this is something that impacts everybody, whether it's economic development, as a lot of folks talk about federal funding, but also private economic investment in communities is also super reliant on census data. And so all of that sort of decision making is also really critical. So this is an opportunity to work with lots of different folks. And so I think that is something I just wanted to emphasize as well. And so also wanted to re-emphasize the opportunity to engage in a complete count committee, either here in your city, the county, and obviously the state's working to organize folks at the state level. And if you're, I know someone's here from the mayor's office, so this could be an opportunity to sort of have that conversation with her tonight as well. And also, I wanted to actually also talk a bit about sort of the, we talked a lot about the citizenship question, which is, I've had a number of, a lot of us have been, a lot of the folks here have been a lot of conversations across the state, and that is something that I know is really just very concerning to a lot of folks. And a lot of questions around what happens, and obviously there are still lawsuits pending, so we don't know whether or not it will wind up on the census form at the end. But if it does, what do we do, and what is the plan for that? And there is no right or perfect answer to make everybody feel comfortable, but it's a conversation that we need to have in case that is something that winds up happening. And so what are the things that we can do to dispel fears around the census? Because it's not only a question of folks who are immigrant communities, but also the online response as well, in addition to that, because one of the things that's a concern for a lot of folks is around the security and privacy of your own information. So a lot of stuff that folks have already mentioned, so I'm not going to go all up in there to do. But so that's just something that I think you all should have an opportunity to talk about this evening as well with each other. And then most importantly, how do we develop a get out the count strategy? And so there are lots of sort of strategies from other spaces around like how do you talk to voters and other experiences that a lot of folks in our communities have had to mobilize around issues, to mobilize around voter registration drives. So there's a lot of strategies and tactics that folks in the communities have employed in terms of talking to your neighbors that could actually be applied to the census. So there's an opportunity to think creatively, tapping into existing experiences, because I know folks who are here tonight are folks who are leaders. I'm sure you're all leaders in your own communities, in your own ways. And so how do you tap into those experiences and strategies that you've used in the past to mobilize your community? Because those are the things that, as you being the experts in your community and what works in your community, should be tapping into and sort of thinking through with each other around how do we utilize those tools, because that's something that we're doing at the Civic Engagement Table. We work with a ton of different organizations who do mobilization, who do go out and knock on doors and canvass and have different kinds of messages that they try to utilize to encourage folks to vote, right? And so we're going to take some of those strategies and try to figure out how to adapt them to developing a get out the count strategy. Because we all have ways of talking to our folks in our community and to figure out how to, just create talking points, persuade people. And so I think that is kind of going to be the big conversation right now. And so I want to just I'm going to just leave it there because I don't want to, I know, like I said at the outset of my talk, that I've been listening to a lot of information. I want to make sure folks have an opportunity to ask questions. But I also just wanted to say that I hope folks signed in tonight, right? Folks signed in when you walk in? Of course. So I know y'all planned a very good meeting here. So I just wanted to share that we will be developing materials for advocates, especially like I know there was some conversation around being able to provide feedback to the state around the plan. So I wanted to just share that we will be providing templates and materials on how to advocate around some of these issues around like federal funding. Some folks mentioned that the census has been historically underfunded, and we want to ensure that this next funding cycle that the census is fully funded as well. So we will be providing that. We can share that to our partners here at the League of Women Voters, and to share that with the participants here tonight. So there's an opportunity for you to utilize some of those things and adapt them for your work. So I wanted to also just share that as a resource that we'll be able to provide for us. Hopefully, later this week, when I get back to my office, be able to share that information with everyone. And so I'll leave it there because I want to make sure folks have an opportunity to talk about what do we do now.
So this is the opportunity you have to ask questions that might have been sparked after everything you've heard. So is there anybody with a question right out front? Yes.
Has there been anything done to use public libraries and also public schools? They all have computers.
As collection spots, you mean? Yeah, the question was, have there been efforts to reach out to libraries and schools? Jeff and Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. We know libraries are going to be one of our top tier partners that we're going to need. I can tell you, as part of the 2018 census test, there was one site that was Providence County, Rhode Island. It happens to be in the New York region as well. And that was one of our biggest partners, community colleges, libraries. So we have had conversations both at the state level and at the local levels. Finding libraries or other sources where there are computers that can help us out in two ways. First, help us recruit. So we have libraries, for instance, in Providence as an example, that on every Wednesday between the hours of 5 and 9, you could use one of their computers, only if you filled out an application for an employment. When it came time to fill out the census form, we had a library system that offered a $5 voucher for taking $5 of fines off your book fines if you fill out your census form at the library. So we're looking at ideas like that to help out. Absolutely, resources like that are going to be critical.
And public schools.
Right.
Public schools, absolutely. We'll have as we have in the past, a statistics in schools program. So we have curriculum right now, K through 12 levels that teachers can pull right now off the internet and teach kids about their students. We're going to be, asking mayors, do you have a school or a number of schools that you would like to? We have census events where we have the kids actually fill out a mock census form. We know in some communities, especially English as a second language, sometimes those kids are maybe the best people to fill out those forms, or at least provide the information to their parents. So absolutely, schools are important as well.
Okay, I have just two questions. The first one, are citizens in nursing homes, independent and assisted living facilities counted in the census?
Yes, they are. So we have separate operations. We have what we call a group quarters operations, and that's when we'll reach out to nursing home facilities where the patients can't come and go. College, universities, dormitories, prisons, jails. And during that group quarters, we work directly with the local administrator at that group quarter, and we work with them to determine what's the best way to ensure it. We count everyone who's living at that particular group quarters as of April 1st.
Okay. The second question I have, why has Congress decreased the funding for census activities?
It's a great question. I wish I could tell you. The only thing I can say is that based upon the projections of what we've been given, what we're told we're going to have for the 2020 census, that the Bureau and the leadership at the Bureau is confident that we have the funding we need to be successful. All right. Now that's if, as I said, we get everything that's told. I think Liz mentioned this earlier. It's a concern they have. Throughout the decade, of course, I would have loved to have done more tests and tried out some things in addition, but I'm kind of a glass half full guy, so I'm focused on moving forward. And I'm extremely happy we got funding for our partnership program, so we're in the process right now. Hopefully by the end of this year, within our region, we'll have at least 100 partnership specialists on board. This is approximately maybe 6 to 8 months earlier than what we had last decade that we're bringing the staff on board, so I'm really kind of focused on getting that program up and running and getting that spread out throughout the state.
Jeff, I have a question. In 2010, there was a assessment, and I like to think I'm somewhat smart, and I was like, when I looked at it. So what type of assessment were you looking for with that assessment?
Yeah, so the assessment is very different from what it's been in the past. It's more of a situational type thing. There are no right or wrong answers.
Okay.
It's basically, you're in this situation, how would you handle it? You're at a door and someone opens the door and starts yelling at you. Would you punch the person in the face? Would you turn and run? And try to explain the importance of the census? There's no wrong answer in there, but there's one that's better than you.
Yeah. I got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Over here, Judy. This lady over here.
I had two questions. One is, how do you make sure snowbirds are counted and not counted twice?
Excellent question, especially in this area. I can imagine a lot of snowbirds. So we try to remind, we have residence criteria. We try to remind people we're trying to take a snapshot of the nation as of April 1st, 2020. So you may be in Florida on April 1st of 2020, but you spend the majority of your time in upstate, in Rochester, let's say, 9 months out of the year. We want to make sure you fill out your form. You're going to get 2 forms. When you're in Florida, you fill out your form that you don't usually live there. And then you fill out your New York address form that this is your usual residence. So there is criteria there. Again, it's a self-response. So part of the things that in communities with a lot of snowbirds, we work with the Complete Count Committee to make sure we're getting the message out before people leave. So they understand that when the form is going to come and that they can go online and fill out the census form still. And just kind of get that message out as early as we can.
And my other question was, what if someone chooses not to answer a question on the form, like citizenship? Is the rest still counted?
Yeah, so there is some threshold where if enough questions are skipped, it won't be considered a completed questionnaire. I can tell you in the past, people have skipped over a question or two. The internet will allow you to skip questions. It's not like you have to answer one to move on. As a census representative, we're still going to promote filling out every question on the form. It's important to us as data collectors that we have as much information as we can. If someone chooses to skip a question, we will not go knock on their door and try to gather that information. We will accept that response.
Judy, she asked some question.
Oh, okay. Anyone else? Questions?
If I could just follow up on her first question about the snowbirds. So where are college students counted? Where are people in prison counted?
Yeah. 2 situations there, excellent questions. College students, again, it's a self-response. So in most situations we see, let's say, I live in Robbinsville, New Jersey. My daughter goes to school at University of Buffalo. She'll get the questionnaire at University of Buffalo. She'll have someone come by to, if she's living in a dorm or she's living in off-campus housing, she'll get a questionnaire. More than likely she would fill it out there. At the same time, as a proud parent, I would say this is her home, that kind of thing. But we get that. The residence criteria states, again, we're focused around April 1st, 2020, and where someone lives or stays most of the time. So it's a great question. I've been at events like this where I have a community member who has a college in their community who says they need to be counted where they live or stay most of the time, which I totally get. They're using those infrastructure, they're using the roads, the healthcare systems, all that. And I've also heard on the other side, well, they're going to come back here after they're done for those years in college. So the criteria we put out is you should be counted where you live or stay most of the time. So again, if you have a son or daughter in college around April 1st of 2020, and they're there 9 months out of the year, they should be counted. Per the criteria, they should be counted at the college.
Although, if you think about summer vacation, winter vacation, spring break, it seems to me my kids were home more than that.
And that's a great thing about the census. That's what you're determining. That's what you're putting on that particular form. You asked about prisoners as well. So there's the criteria we're moving forward with for 2020 is we're providing multiple counts. So first off, we're going to count the person where they're imprisoned. All right. So if they're imprisoned in a particular county, that's what they'll be counted as far as census data. But if we're working with states, if they could provide us information as where they were prior to incarceration, we will also release to them, not the official count, but a count for redistricting, having those counts not where they're incarcerated, but where they were prior to being incarcerated.
So just following up on that, New York State law provides that for state and local redistricting, prisoners are counted where they came from. So we're not allowed to count, the folks who are in Clinton Correctional Facility in Clinton County. You count them, in Manhattan, in Buffalo, wherever they happen to come from. But for congressional reapportionment, it's still counted where they are, not where they came from.
Bad pick on that Clinton Correctional. They might be crawling under the ground. Personal question. Where do expats get counted? My son is an expat.
Okay, your son is
an adult expat.
Okay, and where is he now?
London.
I'll have to dig into research and get back to you specifically on that. We do have a partnership with the military, and for any military members that are stationed, their duty station is in the States, but they're temporarily overseas, we count them in their home state. Now, if they're permanently stationed overseas, I don't believe they're counted in their state, but I want to follow up and get you the correct answer.
Yeah, because they can still vote for state level.
Yeah.
Just not local. All right.
Okay, one more question?
No, I got 8 questions.
You got 2 more, we can make it a full census question.
These might be good questions. Anyway, I just, when you say that you turn over the information to the president, is that it? Is that the end of the line and he decides what gets done?
No, we turn the counts over to the president. So our data compilation and all the work we'll continue doing. So we start releasing, once we give the first count to the president, then we'll start releasing, we'll have a big event where we release the count for the United States. And then we're going to start releasing to the states based upon their redistricting schedule, state counts. And then as time goes on, we'll release lower level detailed files for communities across all states.
So the president has no real jurisdiction over what happens to that information. He just gets it first.
It's just he gets to know what the number is first.
Okay.
President of the United States?
That's correct.
Yeah. How does the census affect the electoral college? Somebody said that it affects it, but I'd like a little more detail.
Sure. I'm not an election lawyer, but it's essentially the same way that congressional reapportionment is done.
Okay, so...
Yeah, it's just that
that's
you
fine.
want a full count so that you get all the electors you should have based on your real population.
Okay. So, how does not having a director, has that affected your operations?
So again, I'm a glass half full guy. Regionally, it hasn't. So I'm still moving forward with the partnership program. I'm still moving forward, with our current plan for the 2020 census. We've had 2 great individuals that have kind of temporarily filled that spot. One of which, Ron Jarman, who was the acting director for non-essential functions of the director or something, real long title that legally we had to call him. So he was basically, quote unquote, the acting director. He's going to be the deputy director, which is fantastic because he's been working closely with the regions. He understands the importance of the partnership program and is out there talking about how we need to engage with communities throughout the United States and Puerto Rico. So it's fantastic. I guess some of the higher level decisions, I'm sure, have to delay maybe some of the funding discussions without having a director. But regionally and most importantly with the partnership program, it has not delayed anything.
Could you talk a little bit, could somebody talk a little bit more about this complete count committee, what exactly they do? And they're supposed to be for every county, or?
So we have a state complete count commission, which is different from a committee only in that a commission is established by an act of the legislature. The committee could be established by executive order. So our state commission will be preparing that report that I described earlier, analyzing the factors that lead to undercount, and developing strategies to ensure that we have a full count. And then making funding recommendations to the legislature and the governor. At the same time, complete count committees can be organized by literally anybody, literally anywhere, with as many people or as few people as the organizer feels is appropriate. We think that encouraging counties to organize these committees to start with is a great scale for complete count committees, because you can engage your entire community, and then you can engage regionally too. Perhaps the Finger Lakes chooses to engage regionally on certain issues. The job of the committee is basically to figure out, as Melody said, develop strategies for getting out the count. So that can happen in any way that the committee chooses. It can happen around any issue, any geography, any population. It's up to whoever organizes it, local governments, nonprofits. It's up to them to decide if they want to fund it or not fund it, to what kind of operations they want to engage in. But the main point is that it's a way for groups of people to organize in their community and use their ideas and strategies that will resonate with their community to get out a complete count. Does that help? No.
Seems a little vague, but it sounds like it is a vague concept, so.
It is, I mean, it's vague in theory, but in actuality, it's amazing at what they do. So you get that group of individuals, as Liz said, who understand their community.
This is my first one.
And if you say, okay, you know, I know in this particular building we have a new group of immigrants who doesn't trust, that we're worried about getting them counted. So then we talk about, well, what's our strategy? Who is their trusted voice? And then what is the right message to get to them? And how do we deliver that message? Is it a in-language PSA on a local in-language radio station? Is it something in a neighborhood magazine? Do we hire one of the neighborhood or the building residents as a cultural facilitator, and they go around to each door with one of the census takers and actually, you know, speak in language or do translations or things like that. So it's just, we know at the lowest level, all of you are no more than anyone else could from the census. And we need to feed off of that. And we need you to be that local voice to, you know, because people trust you.
I have just one more question, I promise. Does anyone here have some information, some detailed information about what the lawsuits are determining, fighting the question, the non-citizenship question on the census? I mean, like what legal argument are they bringing?
Again, I'm not the lawyer working on this. The Attorney General's office is handling this, but we can get you the information that you're looking for. There were 3 claims that were brought. One is that it's a constitutional question of the charge. You know, what exactly is the Census Bureau charged with doing, and what authority do they have to do that? There was a claim under equal protection, and there was a claim under it's called the Administrative Procedures Act. And that first claim was not allowed to go ahead, the second 2 were. And that's in the lawsuit that is part of the New York Coalition. There's a separate lawsuit for California. So I know that's not a ton of detail, but we can get you more information about that.
Liz, maybe you could give us your card.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of a Cinderella's pumpkin thing going on here, timing-wise. If we want to leave time so that we can talk at our table groups, we got time for probably one more short question.
Will the census in Puerto Rico be a real challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. We're changing the way we typically do a census. You know, instead of doing a mail out, mail back, we're actually going to do an update leave operation, which means we're updating the addresses at the latest possible time, which will be in February of 2020. And at the time, we're updating addresses. So we're gonna hire people to walk every inch of Puerto Rico and Vieques and Libre. And we're gonna leave a questionnaire. So they will still have the ability to go online if they have internet connectivity and they want to go online. We're still going to be hiring a bunch of people down there, but it's just going to be a little bit different timing and a little more. We don't use the update leave operation. We typically use it on Indian reservations, remote Alaska, northern Maine, places where we just want to go in, drop off a questionnaire, and get out. So we're going to do that in Puerto Rico again because it allows us to collect. It's the last possible moment we can collect updates on addresses. With all the rebuilding that's going on, that's important.
Okay. I'm sorry, just to add one more thing. Counting Puerto Rican refugees, so to speak, in New York State is very important to us too, because we know that there are a lot of people who came to New York State either before or right after the hurricane, and they deserve to be counted just like every other New Yorker. One of our challenges is communicating whether or not it's appropriate for them to report themselves as a New York State resident. 2 years from now, hopefully people will be able to go home if they want to, but I'm sure there will be people who stay, whether they stay permanently or they're still temporary. We need to communicate that even though you may consider Puerto Rico your home, you are, for the purposes of the census, living in New York State because this is, what do you say, this is like the customary, usual place of residence. So it's something that's on our mind too.
So, thank you very much. Now, if you want to spend, I'm sorry, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought I was loud enough. Okay, so I'd like you really to take just maybe 5 or 10 minutes on those legal pads and just maybe jot down just a quick idea. Maybe a community group or a church group that you're connected with. Maybe something you think you could do to spearhead one of those follow-up actions. And it doesn't have to be obviously in detail, just the idea, the germ of the idea. And then we will be compiling them and sending them back out to all of you so that you can go back to your groups that you're connected with to make sure that the census really moves forward well. So just take maybe 5-10 minutes at the most, and I bet you can do it in 5. It's 8:27. And then leave them on the table if you have to leave, but see our panelists, get a business card so that you have a way, darn, I wish I had asked that, so you'll have that card. So thank you.